The invitation came on a Tuesday, which Marcus Holt thought was a deeply stupid day for life-changing news. It sat on his kitchen counter next to a cold coffee mug and an unpaid water heater bill. It was printed on something that wasn't paper, thinner, cooler, faintly purple, and it did not bend when he picked it up. He read it once. Then he read it again. Then he drank his cold coffee and read it a third time because the first two times hadn't made it make more sense. The Galactic Consortium of Peaceful Worlds had formally invited one human being to attend their grand summit aboard the station called Serenity's Gate. One human, him, Marcus Holt, former military, currently unemployed, owner of one broken water heater and a truck with a cracked windshield. The reason was buried in the fine print, dressed up in polite language that was trying its best, but the meaning was clear enough. The consortium's Social Integration Committee had voted to include a biological curiosity representative from Deathworld designation Sol 3 for educational and cultural observation purposes. He was the punchline. He understood that immediately. Sol 3 was what the rest of the galaxy called Earth, when they bothered to call it anything at all. Most didn't. Most put it in the same category as a minefield or an active volcano, something you noted on your maps, something you gave a wide berth, something you did not engage with unless you had made a terrible decision. Class 9 Deathworld. The designation meant that the planetary environment was so hostile, so overloaded with predators and extreme weather and geological violence, that most species considered it borderline impossible to survive on. The fact that something not only survived there but built cities and wrote books and launched itself into space was, to the rest of the galaxy, somewhere between impressive and deeply alarming. The fact that 43 of those species had decided to invite one of those somethings to their most important annual gathering, as a novelty, told Marcus everything he needed to know about how they saw him. He looked at the water heater bill. He said sure. Serenity's Gate was beautiful, the way things built by people who had never been afraid are beautiful. It was enormous, white and gold and curved in long, sweeping arcs with no sharp edges anywhere, built like something that had never heard of a corner. It sat in orbit above a pale green gas giant, catching the light of a distant sun, gleaming like a piece of jewelry left on dark velvet. The docking corridors were wide and softly lit. The air inside smelled like something sweet and clean, a flower from a world where nothing had ever needed thorns. Marcus walked through it with a bag on his shoulder and his hands in his pockets. The stairs started before he cleared the docking bay. He was used to being looked at in the way tall people are used to being looked at, awareness without surprise, the low-grade knowledge that you take up more visual space than average. But these stairs were different. These had a specific quality to them, the quality of people watching a zoo animal walk itself to its enclosure. The first alien he passed in the main corridor was a Taurelian. He'd studied the species profiles during the 2-week transit from Earth because he was the kind of person who studied things. 7 feet tall, pale blue, long limbs, narrow torso, 4 large luminous eyes the color of sea glass. It stopped moving completely when it saw him. Just stopped in the middle of the corridor and stared. Marcus nodded at it. It made a sound like a small engine misfiring. He kept walking. The second group were Felari, short, round, covered in something between fur and fine feathers, traveling in a cluster of 6. They stopped together and whispered to each other in a language that the translation chip in his ear rendered as a series of soft clicks and then gave up on. One of them pointed at him with a limb that had 4 elbows. He nodded at that one too. He found his quarters without asking for help, using the map he downloaded before boarding. The room was larger than his apartment. The bed was circular, covered in blankets made of something so soft he didn't have a word for the texture. The lights adjusted themselves automatically when he walked in, shifting to a warmer color, which was either thoughtful or unsettling. He sat on the bed, he opened his bag, he took out 3 things. A thermos of coffee he'd made before boarding, because he did not trust alien hospitality to have anything drinkable. A battered paperback novel he'd read twice already, and a small multi-tool that had been his father's and had lived in his pocket every day for 11 years, through 2 deployments, 1 war, and 1 thing he didn't think about. He looked at the ceiling. It had small lights arranged in patterns, alien constellations probably, meaningful to someone. He drank his coffee and read his book and went to sleep at 2100 hours, the way he always did. The Grand Summit opened in a hall that could have held 3 of the largest buildings Marcus had ever been in. He sat at the table assigned to him, small, tucked near the back, noticeably less elaborate than every other table in the room, positioned in the way that tells you clearly that you are not the guest of honor or even the guest of relevance but the guest of entertainment. He sat down, put his notepad on the table, clicked his pen, and listened. He was very good at listening. It was something the military had drilled into him, and then something harder than the military had finished off. You learn to go quiet. You learn to sit still and let information come to you. You learn that the difference between understanding a situation and missing it entirely was usually about 45 seconds of paying attention instead of talking. The proceedings were translated through a chip clipped behind his ear, provided by the consortium, handed to him by an aide who held the small case out to him with 2 fingers, and then took 2 steps back, the way you set food down for something you weren't sure about. He clipped it on and listened anyway. The consortium was discussing trade routes, new membership applications, the expansion of something called the Peaceful Corridor, a stretch of space officially designated conflict-free and under collective protection. 3 species were requesting entry. 2 existing agreements needed revision. It was the most significant political meeting in the known galaxy. It was also a very long meeting with very long speeches, and Marcus had sat through his share of those. He was on his 4th page of notes when the alien beside him spoke. "You are taking notes," not a question, an observation delivered in the tone of someone who has seen a parrot count to 3. The alien's name card said Vex, Saurelian, one of the consortium's founding species, pale gold, long-fingered, with a face arranged in an expression of permanent mild amusement. Vex had the look of someone who found everything around him slightly beneath his full attention, which Marcus recognized as a particular kind of arrogance that crossed all species lines. "Yes," Marcus said. "We did not expect that," Vex said. "What did you expect?" Vex tilted his head. The 3 eyelids on his left eye cycled independently. Confusion, possibly distress. The orientation materials were quite complex. "I read them on the transit over," Marcus said. "All of them." Vex looked at him the way you look at a machine you didn't expect to turn on. "Interesting." "I'm also housebroken," Marcus said, in case that was next. The 3 eyelids did the sequence again, faster this time. It was, Marcus had decided, Saurelian laughter. "You have humor," Vex said. "We have lots of things," Marcus said, and went back to his notes. The joke came at him in pieces over the next several hours, the way it always did when you were the subject of one. A cluster of delegates near the refreshment area, watching him eat and speaking in undertones that the translation chip caught anyway. Something about whether the Deathworlder would use utensils correctly. Something about the wisdom of allowing him access to anything sharp. A junior aide who handed him his event itinerary and then held completely still, watching his hands the whole time, the way you watch a dog that hasn't bitten anyone yet. A note in the General Summit communication feed, forwarded to his channel by what was either an accident or a very unsubtle joke, describing his presence as a light-hearted inclusion to provide biological diversity and novelty to the standard proceedings. He read the note. He set his communication device on the table. He looked at the gas giant outside the nearest observation window, its atmosphere churning in slow, massive bands of green and white. He wasn't angry. He'd been the joke before. He knew what to do with it, which was nothing visible. You filed it somewhere cold and you kept moving and you watched, because people who were laughing at you were also, without meaning to, telling you everything about themselves. He was watching when he noticed the wall. He almost missed it. He was walking the long route back from the refreshments, the route that went past the outer observation corridor, which had the best view of the gas giant, when the wall at Junction 7 stopped him. It looked fine. White, smooth, seamless as everything else on the station. But there was a line in it, almost invisible unless the light caught it at the right angle, and the light caught it for 1 second as he passed, and he stopped. The seam was straight. Everything on Serenity's gate was curved. The design was consistent, almost obsessively so. Every junction, every panel, every surface followed the same arc. The consortium's architects, whoever they were, did not do straight lines. This seam was straight, precise, deliberate. He put his hand flat on the wall casually, like he was just resting it there. The wall was warm, not station warm, not the ambient temperature of a climate-controlled interior. Something behind the wall was generating heat, something with a power source. He took his hand away. He kept walking. He went back to his table and sat down and looked at his notes. He wrote Junction 7, wrong seam, wrong warmth, check tonight. He looked up at the hall, at the 43 species in their best clothes, making speeches, signing agreements, feeling the particular safety of people who had never had to consider whether the walls around them were what they appeared to be. He looked at the wall visible from his table, Junction 4, and found another seam. He wrote that down. That night, in the long quiet of the station's dark cycle, Marcus walked the outer corridors alone. He had not told anyone. There was no one to tell. He was the joke, the novelty, the Deathworlder in the back of the room. No one was listening to him, and no one was going to start listening to him because he asked nicely. So he walked. He had his multi-tool and his thermos and the careful, unhurried attention that was the thing he had always been best at. He found 6 seams in 4 corridors. He found 2 of them warm. He found one of them that, when he ran the edge of his multi-tool along the base, had a gap, a millimeter wide, almost nothing, and through the gap came air that was colder than the station's climate system. Cold, recycled differently, breathed. He crouched there in the empty corridor for a moment, very still. He listened. A vibration, very faint, rhythmic, not mechanical, the kind of rhythm that a living thing makes when it is trying very hard to make no sound at all and its body is betraying it anyway. Something was behind the wall. Something alive. Something that was hiding. He stood up. He put his tool back in his pocket. He walked back to his quarters, slow and even, not looking behind him, not changing his pace, the way he'd been trained to move when the information was critical, and the worst thing you could do was let anyone know you had it. He sat on the soft circular bed. He looked at the alien stars on the ceiling. He thought about warm walls and hidden seams and the gap that breathed. He thought about 43 species that had been peaceful for so long, they had forgotten what it felt like when something was waiting for them. He made a list, every seam, every location, every temperature, everything he had seen. Outside, the gas giant storm churned on, massive, silent, patient, the kind of thing that had been building for centuries and had not yet decided it was finished. Marcus did not sleep. He planned. Morning came on the station in a slow warmth, the lights in every corridor brightening over 20 minutes the way a sunrise does on a world with weather. Marcus had been awake since 400. He had showered, eaten from his own supplies. He hadn't touched the station's food delivery yet. Not out of fear, just habit. You ate what you knew when you were working, and spent 2 hours going over his notes until the list was organized by location, temperature variance, and proximity to load-bearing structures. He had 12 entries. 12 wrong seams in a station that, as far as the consortium was concerned, had been swept, certified, and declared secure by a team of 38 specialists before the summit began. He thought about the 38 specialists and what they had been trained to look for: advanced surveillance tech, weapons, communication intercepts, the sophisticated threats that sophisticated enemies used against sophisticated targets. He thought about what they had not been trained to look for, because it had never occurred to anyone that it needed looking for: bodies, living things pressed flat against the wrong side of the walls, breathing shallow and waiting. The question was what they were waiting for. The second day of the summit had a different schedule: smaller working groups, bilateral meetings, a cultural exhibition in the afternoon where various species shared art and food and music from their home worlds. Marcus went to all of it. He was not invited to the working groups, of course. He was not part of any bilateral. But he was allowed into the exhibition hall, because you couldn't very well have a cultural novelty and then not display it. And he walked through the hall at the speed of someone who was looking at art but was really watching doorways and crowd movement, and the behavior of the station's small security team. 6 consortium officers in pale blue uniforms who patrolled in pairs and spent most of their time standing by refreshment tables looking comfortable. He was watching one of the security pairs when someone spoke beside him. "You have been walking these corridors since before sunrise." He turned. The alien standing beside him was small, 3.5 feet, maybe 4, and built narrow, with 4 arms and a face that had far too many expressions moving across it at once, which he had learned in his species profile reading was a Vethani thing. Vethani processed emotion physically, rapidly, in their facial structures rather than controlling and concealing it. The one beside him was currently cycling through something like curiosity, something like caution, and something like the specific look a person gets when they have been watching someone else do something interesting and can no longer resist commenting. Her name card, clipped to the front of what passed for formal attire among Vethani, read Zara. "I'm a morning person," Marcus said. "You were not walking for exercise," she said, not accusing, just accurate. He looked at her for a moment. She had a small data pad in 2 of her 4 hands and a stylus in a third. The fourth was holding what looked like a cup of something warm. A researcher, he thought. Someone who paid attention. Someone who had been paying attention to him. "What's your field?" he asked. "Biological observation," she said. "I was assigned to document your visit." "Document me?" "Yes." She did not look embarrassed about it. He respected that. "I have 17 pages of notes." "I have 12, he said. "Want to compare?" She tilted her head. 4 expressions moved across her face in sequence: surprise, interest, reassessment, and something warmer that didn't have a human name. "What are your notes about?" He looked around the exhibition hall. At the pale blue security officers by the refreshment table. At the clusters of delegates moving from display to display, unworried, unhurried, certain of their safety in the way that people are certain of things that have never failed them. "The walls," he said. He told her about Junction 7 in a corner of the exhibition hall, behind a display of Sorelian music sculptures that made sounds too high for humans to register, standing close and speaking low because the music covered their voices. He showed her his list. She read it twice with 2 of her eyes while the other 2 watched the room, which he noted. Good instincts, even if she didn't know why she had them. "This could be structural anomalies," she said when she finished. "All of them, in a station that passed its safety sweep 48 hours ago." She looked at him. "What do you think it is?" "I think something is in the walls," he said. "I think it's been there since before the summit started. I think it's alive and it's waiting, and nobody on the security team knows about it, because nobody on the security team has been trained to put their hand on a wall and check if it's breathing." Zara was quiet for a moment. Her face moved through 6 or 7 things quickly. "That is a serious claim," she said. "Yes." if you take it to the Summit Council. They will. Laugh at me, Marcus said. Yes, I know. She looked at him steadily. Why tell me then? He thought about it. Because you're the only one on this station who's been watching me carefully enough to notice I was up before sunrise. That means you notice things. I need someone who notices things. She was quiet again. Then she said, show me Junction 7. She stood at Junction 7 with two hands pressed flat on the wall and her eyes closed. And Marcus watched her face go very still in the particular way that Vethani faces went still, when they weren't performing a motion, but actually having one. It is warm, she said. Yes. And the seam doesn't match any other seam on this level. I checked the design schematics in the station's public information archive last night. She opened her eyes, she looked at the seam, then she looked at him. How did you know to look for this? Marcus thought about how to answer that. He thought about the kind of world that had built him, the gravity that was slightly higher than anything else in the known galaxy, the predators that had spent 65 million years refining themselves, the weather systems that could erase a coastline in an afternoon. He thought about 3 million years of human evolution under conditions that made most other species' homeworlds look like resorts. Where I come from, he said, you learn to check what's in the walls because something usually is. She looked at him for a long time. Her face was doing something that the translation chip tried to render as recalibrating. He thought that was probably right. We should take this to the security team, she said. I agree. They won't believe you. I know, Marcus said, but they'll believe you. You're official, you have credentials, you have 17 pages of research notes. He looked at her. Tell them it was your observation, I'll back you up. She tilted her head. You would let someone else take the finding. I don't care who gets the credit, he said. I care about what's in the walls. The chief security officer on Serenity's gate was a Taurelian named Commander Osvel, 7 feet of pale blue authority, who had been running station security for 11 years without incident, which meant he had been running station security for 11 years without anything bad happening, which meant he had developed the specific professional confidence of someone who has never needed to be wrong. He listened to Zara's report with his 4 luminous eyes focused over her head at the middle distance, the classic posture of someone who has already decided what they think before the information is finished arriving. The station passed its full security sweep 2 days ago, he said when she finished. Yes, Zara said, but conducted by certified specialists, Osvel said. I understand, but if we could. The Deathworlder pressed his hand on some walls and said they felt warm. Osvel looked at Marcus for the first time. The look was the specific one Marcus had been getting since he arrived, part curiosity, part condescension, part the general caution of someone who doesn't know whether you're an idiot or dangerous and is hopping you're just an idiot. The thermal variance is measurable, Marcus said. You don't have to take my word for it. Run the sensors yourselves. We ran full sensor sweeps. Internal sensors or external? Osvel paused, half a second, less than half, but Marcus caught it. Internal, Osvel said. The station is secured from the inside out. So anything that was in the wall space before the sensors ran. The wall space is not accessible from inside the station. From inside, no, Marcus said. What about from the outer hull? The pause this time was longer. Osvel's 4 eyes shifted slightly. A micro-movement, the kind that meant something was turning over in a mind that was used to not turning things over. The outer hull is monitored by automated systems, Osvel said, but the certainty in his voice had dropped a registered degree. Automated systems that were programmed when, Marcus asked, and last calibrated when, and calibrated to detect what exactly? Osvel looked at him. Something in the 4 luminous eyes had changed from condescending to calculating. You are suggesting, Osvel said slowly, that something entered the wall spaces from outside the hull before the summit security lockdown and has been in the walls since. I'm suggesting you check, Marcus said. That's all. Run an external thermal scan of the junctions on my list. If I'm wrong, nothing's lost except 20 minutes. Another pause, this one longer. And if you're right, Oswell said. Marcus looked at the 12 entries on his list. At the locations, spread across 4 corridors, arranged in a pattern that he'd been staring at all morning, and that kept making him think of something, a shape he couldn't quite finish placing yet. If I'm right, he said, we don't have much time. Oswell ran the scans. He ran them quietly, without broadcasting to the summit, and Marcus stood in the security station with Zara beside him, and watched the thermal imaging render the outer wall structures of corridors 2, 4, and 7 in false color gradients. The results came back in 11 minutes. The security station went very quiet. 16 heat signatures, not 12, 16. He'd missed 4. They were in the walls all along the outer ring of the station, positioned, Marcus now saw with cold clarity, in the exact pattern you would use if you wanted to be able to move to every major juncture on the station simultaneously. Not surveillance, not reconnaissance. Positioning, pre-assault positioning. What are they? Zara said very quietly. No one answered immediately. The heat signatures were dense, warm-blooded or the equivalent, and the shape of them, even flattened and compressed into the wall spaces, suggested larger than a Torellian, larger than most of what was in the summit hall. Oswell stood with his hands at his sides, perfectly still, looking at the screen. His professional certainty was gone. In its place was something Marcus recognized from a very different context. The face of someone who has just realized the situation was never what they thought it was. We do not know, Oswell said. We have never seen this. Marcus looked at the positions. He looked at the corridors. He looked at the summit hall marked at the center of the map. They're waiting for an order, Marcus said. And when it comes, he traced the corridors from the outer ring to the center point. They'll be in the main hall in under 3 minutes. Zara made a sound he didn't have a translation for. Oswell turned to his team. He started giving quiet, rapid orders: seal the summit hall exits, pull the senior delegates without explanation, do not cause panic. His team moved fast. He was good at his job, Marcus decided. He just hadn't been tested before. Marcus looked at the thermal map. 16 signatures, all of them still, all of them waiting. He thought about what kind of species climbed the outside of a space station to hide in its walls. He thought about what kind of mission required 16 of them. He thought about the consortium's 43 peaceful species in the summit hall, none of them built for what was in those walls, none of them who had ever needed to be. He put his hand in his pocket, found the multi-tool, turned it over once, twice, the worn metal familiar in a way that steadied him. He thought, they came here thinking soft targets. He thought, they don't know I'm here. He thought, good. The order came 40 minutes later. Marcus was in the security station, helping Oswell map evacuation routes, when the thermal imaging lit up like a board game somebody had kicked over. All 16 signatures moved at once, simultaneous, coordinated. Not scouts then. A strike team. They're in the walls, Oswell said, which was a sentence he was clearly saying for the first time in his career, because it came out with a quality of complete disbelief, the sound of a man watching a word he thought was theoretical become real. They're moving, Marcus said, already at the door. How many delegates are still in the main hall? 63. We couldn't clear them without. How many of your security team are armed? All 6 officers carry stun rods in. With things that stop something large. Oswell looked at him. The station is not a military installation. We are a peaceful station, Marcus said. Yes, with 16 large things in the walls moving toward your 63 delegates. He looked at the security officer. What do you have that hits hard? a pause that Marcus could not afford. Then Oswell opened a second cabinet on the wall of the security station, and Marcus looked at what was inside. The cabinet had 6 stun rods, 4 long-range shock emitters that were built for crowd control, and 1 plasma cutter that was technically a maintenance tool, and technically not a weapon, the way a hammer was technically not a weapon. Marcus took the plasma cutter. He took one of the shock emitters. He looked at Zara, who had followed him from the thermal imaging screen, and was standing in the doorway with her small 4-armed frame and her data pad, and her face moving through 12 emotions a second. "Stay here," he said. "You cannot fight 16 of them alone," she said. "I'm not going to fight 16 of them at once," he said. "That would be stupid." He left the security station at a run. The first wall panel blew out at corridor junction 4. Marcus was already in the corridor when it happened. He heard it before he saw it, a deep, tearing sound, metal giving way under pressure applied from the wrong direction. And then the panel came out in a single piece, tossed aside the way you toss aside something you don't respect. The thing that came through it was large. That was the first thing. It was larger than anything Marcus had seen in 2 days of alien species, larger than the Taurelians, built on a completely different philosophy, thick, armored-looking, with 4 legs and 2 primary upper limbs, and a head that sat low between massive shoulders. Its coloring was dark, somewhere between deep green and black, and its skin had a texture that suggested something that had evolved on a world where being hard to get through was the primary survival strategy. Its eyes found Marcus immediately. Small eyes, bright, smart. The second of assessment was mutual and very fast. Marcus thought predator, ambush specialist, used to targets that run. He thought, I am not going to run. He fired the shock emitter. The thing took the hit across its upper torso and staggered, genuinely staggered, which told Marcus the weapon had some effect even if it didn't drop it, and then it came for him. Fast. 4 legs gave it a stability and acceleration that 2 legs didn't, and it closed the corridor distance between them in under 2 seconds, which was fast enough to be genuinely impressive, and not fast enough to reach him before he had moved sideways against the wall, and used the thing's own momentum to let it pass him, and put the plasma cutter against the joint where its neck met its armored shoulder, and fired at close range. The smell was terrible. The thing went down. Marcus moved. He did not look at it again. You checked your kill when you had time, and right now he did not have time, because the thermal map he had memorized showed 3 more signatures converging on junction 4 and 2 more on the corridor that ran parallel, and all of them would have heard the noise and would be adjusting. He went up. The station's maintenance access ladder was exactly where the station schematics said it was, recessed into the wall of the corridor, and he went up it fast, 3 rungs at a time, into the service passage that ran above the main corridor level, the passage the consortium security team had never had reason to use because the station had never been in a situation that required fighting from the ceiling. He went through the service passage at a crouch, fast, silent, and came out through the next access hatch 20 meters ahead of where the 3 signatures were converging. He came out behind them. What happened in the next 6 minutes was not something Marcus thought about in real time. Thinking was for before and after. During, there was only the moving and the information and the decisions that happened faster than thought, the thing that lives in the body below the mind, and was built for exactly this, built on a death world over millions of years, built by everything that had ever tried and failed to kill the things that eventually became humans. He took down 2 more before they knew he was in the passage system. The third one knew. It turned fast, and it was strong, stronger than him, physically, in the way that things built heavier are always stronger, and it got both its upper limbs around him before he fired the shock emitter directly into the soft tissue at its midsection, which was the lesson from the first one. The soft places were the places, and it let go. He did not come out of that one clean. His left shoulder had been wrenched in a direction it was not designed to go, and the pain was the specific bright pain of something that would need addressing later and was not his problem right now. He kept moving. In the summit hall, the 63 delegates who had not yet been evacuated were learning about fear. It came through the walls on the south side of the hall, 2 panels, simultaneously, loud enough to be felt in the chest. 2 of the creatures came through, and the hall, which had been the site of careful diplomatic proceedings for 2 days, became something else entirely in under 4 seconds. The delegates ran. They ran the way beings run who have never needed to know where to run, clustering and doubling back and getting in each other's paths and screaming in 7 different languages simultaneously. The 2 consortium security officers in the hall did exactly what their training told them, which was to put themselves between the threat and the delegates and activate their stun rods. The stun rods did very little. 1 officer went down in the first 10 seconds. The other managed to stay standing for longer and landed enough hits to make the second creature slow, but slowing was not stopping, and there were more panels vibrating along the east wall and the sound of more things pushing through. Vex, who Marcus had assessed on day 1 as the most arrogant being in any room he occupied, was pressed against the far wall of the hall with his golden hands flat on the surface behind him and his 3 eyes wide. And what was on his face was not amusement anymore. What was on his face was the pure and total recognition that the world was nothing like he had believed it was. That was when the 3rd creature coming through the east wall took a plasma cutter blast to the face from above. Everyone in the hall looked up. Marcus came down from the ceiling access panel and landed on the creature's back and drove it into the floor, and the hall went very briefly, completely silent. There is a version of this moment that would have been triumphant. That was not the version that happened. The version that happened was that Marcus stood up from the downed creature in the dead center of the summit hall, with a plasma cutter in one hand and a shoulder that was sending very urgent signals up his spinal cord. And he looked at the 63 delegates pressed against the walls, and the fallen security officer on the floor, and the remaining consortium officer standing with a bent stun rod, and his pale blue face completely drained of color. And he did a fast head count of the signatures he still needed to account for. 12 down or disabled, 4 still unaccounted for. All of you listen, he said, loud, flat, no decoration. The translation chips would handle distribution. The other 4 are in the outer corridors. The exits on the north side of this hall are currently clear. Move, single file, do not run, walk fast, stay low, stay together. He looked at the standing security officer. You're leading them, go. The officer looked at him, at the downed creature, at the plasma cutter. You are. A Deathworlder from the back of the room, yes, Marcus said. Walk. The delegates began to move. Vex, passing him, stopped for one moment. His 3 eyelids ran through their cycle. He said nothing. Marcus didn't need him to. The 4 remaining signatures came from the service passages when the main hall went quiet, attracted by the noise or following a preset timeline. Marcus couldn't know which, but they came. And the corridor outside the summit hall became the narrowest and worst possible place for something large and built like a weapon to fight something bipedal and half its weight. It was also, as it happened, the kind of terrain that the half-its-weight thing knew how to use. Service corridors were tight. 4 legs were a disadvantage in tight spaces. The advantage of mass and strength required room to operate. The creatures were built for open ground, for the kind of engagement where you could use your size and your speed and your momentum, and Marcus had been trained in exactly the kind of close, dirty, grinding work that turned those advantages into liabilities. He went into the corridor with the plasma cutter and the last charge in the shock emitter, and the multi-tool his father had given him, which was not a weapon but was heavy and had a very hard edge, and he did not think about the 4 signatures as a number. He thought about them one at a time. The first one came fast, filling the corridor shoulder to shoulder, and Marcus went flat against the wall and let it commit to its forward momentum and put the plasma cutter against the base of its spine and fired. The second one stopped when the first one went down, which told him it was smart enough to recalibrate. Smart was good, actually. Smart meant it could be confused. He threw the empty shock emitter down the corridor, hard behind it. The creature turned. He came up behind it. One down. Two left. He was bleeding from his forearm by the time the fifth creature was down. The wrenched shoulder was singing in a higher key. He'd taken a glancing hit from a limb that felt like it was made of compressed concrete, and his ribs had opinions about that. The sixth one caught him properly, got a grip on his jacket, lifted, slammed him into the corridor wall hard enough to put a crack in the paneling behind his back. He did not lose the plasma cutter. He fired it upward at close range, into the underside of the creature's jaw, and it released him. He landed, kept his feet, barely. He stood in the corridor with his back against the cracked wall, and his breath coming hard, and his shoulder and his ribs and his forearm all filing simultaneous complaints. And the corridor was quiet now, the kind of quiet that settles over a space after something violent has passed through it and is finished. He looked at the last creature down. He looked at his hand around the plasma cutter, steady, the way his father's hand had been steady, the way you learn to be steady on a world that gives you no other option. He breathed. He put himself in order. He started walking back toward the summit hall because there was still work to do and there was always still work to do, and somewhere behind him Zara's voice came through the station comm channel saying his name, and then saying it again, and he reached up and keyed the channel and said, "I'm clear. All 6 corridors. Get a medical team to the south exit. Secondary officer is down." A pause. Then Zara's voice, stripped of its professional observer distance, said, "Marcus, are you hurt?" He looked at his arm, at the shoulder he was not using, at the general inventory of things that needed attention. "I'm upright," he said. He kept walking. The medical team was Vethani. 3 of them, small and quick with their 4 arms and their soft voices, and they met him at the south exit junction with a portable unit, and said things the translation chip converted as, "Please stop walking for 30 seconds. And your arm is a concern. And how are you standing with that shoulder?" He sat on a crate someone had pulled out of storage and let them work. Zara was there. She stood back while the medics worked, and she held her data pad in 2 hands and did not use it. Her face was doing the Vethani thing, moving through a rapid sequence of things he'd learned to partially read over the past 2 days, relief, sharp and physical, followed by something more complicated that kept recurring, cycling back in between the other expressions like a song stuck on a particular note. 14, she said. He looked at her. "You confirmed 14, she said. "We located the remaining 2 in the lower deck wall spaces. They surrendered when they understood the strike had failed." She paused. "They are larger than I expected." "Most things are," Marcus said. One of the medics said something sharp in Vethani that the chip rendered as "stop talking and hold still." He held still. "Do you know what species they are?" he asked Zara. She did. He could see it in the way her face went briefly careful. "They are Keth," she said. He hadn't heard the word before, but the quality with which she said it told him enough. The specific compression of voice that meant a name everyone in the room except him would recognize. A name that came with a long history attached. "Tell me," he said. "Later," she said, "when you are not bleeding." He accepted this. The 2 Keth who had surrendered were held in the station's small secure bay, which had not been built for this purpose, and was doing its best. Osvel had them restrained with equipment that had originally been designed to manage malfunctioning cargo haulers, which was the closest thing available to something that could hold something their size. Marcus stood outside the bay with his arm wrapped, and his shoulder braced, and a borrowed jacket that didn't quite fit, because nothing on the station had been sized for his particular build, and he looked at the Keth through the observation panel. Up close with time to look properly, they were impressive in the specific way that apex predators are impressive. Everything about them said that they had evolved to be at the top of their food chain on a world that took that competition seriously. The four-legged stance, the dense armor-like skin, the low-set head with its small, bright eyes, the way they held themselves even now, restrained and failed in their mission, with a kind of stubborn dignity that Marcus recognized. He recognized it because it was what he tried to carry himself. Osvel appeared at his shoulder, which given the height difference meant at roughly his mid-back. "You should be in the medical bay." "I should be talking to those two," Marcus said. "They have not spoken since their capture. They haven't had the right conversation yet." Marcus looked at the Keth through the panel. "The consortium's interrogators, when will they arrive?" "We have requested a full response team from Central. They will arrive in 19 hours. 19 hours is a long time," Marcus said. He went in. The Keth looked at him the way they had in the corridor, that fast, precise assessment, the one that filed you as threat or not threat. He had watched it happen on the faces of the ones he'd fought, and he watched it happen now on the faces of these two, and he watched what came after it, which was the thing he'd been counting on. Confusion. Because he didn't fit. He was smaller than any of the others in the strike team. He was not built the way they were. He was not Taurelian, not Saurelian, not any of the 43 species of the consortium, and he was standing in front of them with a wrapped arm and a shoulder brace, and he had just taken down 14 of their team, and none of those facts fit together into a framework they understood. He sat down across from them, no table, just the floor of the secure bay because he wanted to be at their eye level, and he said simply, "You didn't know I was here." No response, but the small bright eyes moved. That was enough. "The consortium didn't know what I was going to do either," he said. "I don't think anyone did. That's usually how this works." He looked at them evenly. "Your operation was planned against a specific target, a station full of diplomatic personnel who have never been in a fight. It was well planned. You positioned over days, avoided sensor sweeps, had a clear timing objective." He paused. "It failed because of one variable nobody accounted for." One of the Keth spoke. The translation chip worked on it for a moment and then produced, "What are you?" "Not what species, what?" "I'm from Earth," Marcus said. "Sol 3, the one on your maps with the hazard designation." A pause, then the same Keth said, "The Deathworld." "Yes." Another pause, longer. "You were invited as a jest." "Yes." The Keth's small eyes did something that Marcus's reading of alien expressions was not good enough to parse. Something that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to a kind of recognition. "That is," the Keth said, and the chip struggled, "unfortunate for the plan." "Yes," Marcus said, "it was." He had not come in here to extract intelligence. The consortium's people would do that or try. He had come in because he wanted to look at them and understand what they had been attempting, and now, sitting on the floor of a borrowed secure bay while his shoulder throbbed, he thought he had it. They had come here to break the consortium, not to destroy the station. They could have done that from outside. They had come to walk into the summit hall in the middle of the most important gathering of peaceful species in the galaxy and take hostages, or worse, while those species were together in one room. They had come to teach 43 species a lesson in how thin the safety they believed in actually was. It was a good plan, against the right target. The right target being everyone who had been in that hall, except one person who had been invited as a joke. "Tell me who sent you," Marcus said. Neither Keth spoke. "You don't have to," Marcus said. "I'm not the interrogator. The consortium's team gets here in 19 hours and they'll ask better questions than me." He stood up. His shoulder registered its opinion clearly. He moved toward the door and then stopped and looked back at them. "For what it's worth, your strike team fought well. They were disciplined and coordinated, and 3 of them nearly had me." He said it plainly, without bravado. That's not nothing. He left. The summit did not resume. The delegates who had been in the hall were in the medical bay or in their quarters or in small, shaken clusters in the station's common areas, speaking in quiet voices or not speaking at all. The kind of stillness that settles over a group of people who have just had something fundamental rewritten for them. Their understanding of what was possible, what was real, how the world was arranged. Marcus found a seat in the observation lounge near the gas giant view and sat with a cup of the station's tea, which turned out to be drinkable barely, and he looked at the planet below and he thought. Zara found him there an hour later. She climbed up onto the seat beside him, which given her height required a small amount of effort, and she sat with her own cup of something warm and looked out at the gas giant for a while without speaking. The Keth Empire, she said eventually. They have been expanding for 40 years, slowly, carefully, territory by territory, always with a reason, always with some provocation they could point to. She paused. The consortium has been negotiating with them for 6 of those years, attempting to find terms. Has it worked? Marcus said, already knowing the answer. No, but we continued attempting it because the alternative, she stopped. The alternative required us to consider things we do not consider, conflict, defense, weapons. She looked at him. These are not things the consortium has prepared for. We have not needed to. You've needed to, Marcus said. You just didn't know it yet. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, will you say that to the council when they reconvene? Marcus looked at the gas giant. The storm that had been turning slowly below them since he arrived had built into something larger, a spiral the size of a small continent, white and complex. The kind of thing that had been doing exactly what it was always going to do, and the only question was whether the people above it were paying attention. I'll say it if they ask me, he said. They will ask you, Zara said. He looked at her. You are no longer the joke at the back of the room, she said simply. The council reconvened in a smaller chamber than the summit hall, with fewer delegates and more of the particular quiet of people who have recently been frightened. Marcus sat at a table that was not the small joke table at the back. He sat beside Osvel, who had spent the last several hours transforming from a commander, who had been surprised into a commander, who was processing what that surprise meant about his career and his choices and his station, and who carried that processing in every line of his body. They listened to the full account from the security team, the thermal imaging, the 16 signatures, the 15 who had been stopped and the 2 in custody. Then they looked at Marcus. He was tired. He was honest about that, at least with himself. The shoulder, the arm, the ribs, the specific exhaustion that comes not from physical effort alone, but from the sustained, grinding weight of being responsible for other people's lives in a situation where no one else is going to do it. He had not slept in 31 hours. He had coffee that was getting cold. He told them what he had told the 2 Keth in the secure bay. Not the personal conversation, the assessment, the Keth strategy, the intent behind the strike, the reason a well-planned operation against the right targets had failed for a reason that had nothing to do with the consortium's security and everything to do with one variable nobody had put in the calculation. The Keth did not account for a Deathworlder, he said, not because they are unintelligent, because no one told them one was here, and no one told them because you invited me as a novelty, as something to look at. He looked around the room. He was not angry. He was just saying the thing clearly. That is why I'm still alive to be having this conversation. Not because I'm extraordinary, because I was underestimated, by them and by you. The silence in the chamber was the kind that means a room is thinking. He pressed on, because there was more to say, and he was going to say it before his shoulder got any louder. The Keth are going to know it failed. They're going to know why it failed. That gives you a window, not a long one, where they are recalibrating and you can move. He looked at Osvel. The The station's security protocol needs to be rebuilt from the basic assumption that the threat could come from anywhere, including the places you've never looked because you've never needed to. He looked back at the council, and the consortium needs to have a different conversation about what comes next. Not the negotiation conversation, the other one, the one you've been avoiding. You are suggesting we prepare for war, one of the delegates said. I'm suggesting you prepare for reality, Marcus said. The Keth were planning this whether you were ready or not. The only thing that changed today is that now you know. Vex was in the chamber. He had said nothing during the account, which was unusual enough to notice. He was looking at Marcus with an expression that Marcus could not read, and at the end of the silence that followed, he spoke. When the consortium decided to invite a human, Vex said, carefully and clearly, the vote was close. Many of us believed it was not merely unorthodox but unnecessary, a performance of openness with no practical value. He stopped, looked at his long gold hands on the table. I voted in the majority. No one said anything. I was wrong, Vex said, and I would like to go on record as having said so. It was 3 seconds of silence after that. Then the council started talking, not the long speech kind, the kind with real weight, the kind that happens when people have stopped maintaining positions and started trying to figure out what was actually true. Marcus drank his cold coffee. It was, all things considered, the most successful meeting he had ever attended. The consortium's response team arrived in 18 hours and 40 minutes, which was 19 minutes ahead of schedule, and told Marcus everything he needed to know about how seriously the central offices were taking the Serenity's Gate incident. They came in 3 ships. The first carried the intelligence and interrogation team, 20 personnel, quiet and professional, with equipment that looked nothing like the station's borrowed cargo restraints. The second carried a full engineering unit with orders to strip and rebuild the station's entire security infrastructure. The third carried 7 members of the consortium's High Council, including a representative from every founding species, who arrived with the specific gravity of people who have flown a very long way very fast because something has happened that makes distance irrelevant. Marcus watched the ship's dock from the observation lounge where he had sat with Zara and his cold tea the night before. He had slept 6 hours. His shoulder was being managed with something the Vethani medics had given him that worked better than anything he'd used before, which he made a note to ask about later. His arm was bandaged and his ribs had been wrapped and he had eaten an actual meal. The station's food turned out to be fine, actually. Some of it was good. He looked like and felt like a man who had spent 2 days finding hidden enemies and fighting them. He looked exactly like the meeting he was about to walk into required him to look. The High Council meeting lasted 4 hours. Marcus had not been sure they would include him. He had not been sure of a lot of things since the invitation on the Tuesday with the purple paper and the water heater bill. But he was in the room, at a full table this time, at a seat that was the same size as everyone else's, and the 7 High Council members listened to everything. The thermal scan, the corridor engagements, the conversation with the Keth in the secure bay, and they asked careful, specific questions that told him these were people who, once they understood a situation was serious, could be serious. The lead representative was a Taurelian, different from Osvel in the way of senior leadership, which is that she had learned to arrange her 4 luminous eyes into a readable calm instead of an expressive reaction. Her name was High Counselor Rayshan, and she had been in this role for 16 years, and she asked questions the way someone asks who has been asking them for 16 years and knows which answers matter. You identified the threat, she said to Marcus, because of a physical characteristic, the warmth of the walls. Yes, he said. No sensor on the station detected this. The sensors were configured to detect technology, not biology, Marcus said. The Keth aren't using advanced tech to hide. They're using their own bodies. They've adapted for this. Their metabolic output is low enough under rest conditions that an untuned sensor reads them as background noise. But their core temperature is still warm. You have to put your hand on the wall to feel it. He paused. The sensors don't have hands. Ray Shan looked at him steadily. And you thought to put your hand on the wall because... Because where I'm from, Marcus said. You check the walls, you check everything. It's not a methodology, it's a reflex. She was quiet for a moment. On Earth, she said. On Earth, he said. He had explained Earth once already that morning to the intelligence team, but the way Ray Shan said it told him she wanted to hear it directly. So he described it. He did not dress it up or simplify it. He described the gravity and the predators and the bacterial environment and the weather systems, and the specific quality of 3 million years of evolutionary pressure that produces a species that checks walls and sleeps lightly and understands, in the way of things that were prey before they were predators and then became both at once, that safety is something you create every day through constant attention, and if you stop creating it, it stops existing. The room was quiet when he finished. One of the other High Council members, a Sorelian, different from Vex in almost every way except the golden hands, said, "We classified your world as a prohibited designation. Class 9. I know," Marcus said. "We put it on our hazard maps." "I know that too. We warned every species under consortium protection to avoid it." "Yes," Marcus said. The Sorelian looked at him. "We thought we were protecting ourselves from your world. We did not consider," she said slowly, "that we might have been protecting your world from us. That by staying away, by labeling it and avoiding it, we left your species without contact, without information, without..." She stopped. "Without knowing the Keth exist," Marcus said. "Yes," she said quietly, "among other things." That sat in the room for a moment. "What would you have done," Ray Shan asked, "if you had known? If Earth had been a consortium member and had known about the Keth's expansion for 6 years? Marcus thought about his planet, about what his planet had produced, about every human who had ever stood between something dangerous and someone who couldn't stand between it themselves. "Something earlier than this," he said. "The Keth command was reached through official consortium channels on the 3rd day, which required 11 hours of careful diplomatic maneuvering before anyone was willing to be on the communication at the same time, and then another 2 hours of language work before the exchange began." Marcus was not in the room for the first part. He was in the observation lounge when Zara came to find him, which was becoming a pattern he had stopped finding surprising. She came with 2 cups of something warm. She had started bringing him things that approximated coffee, which tasted like coffee's philosophical cousin, close enough to appreciate, and she sat beside him and watched the gas giant with him for a while before speaking. "The Keth command has confirmed the operation," she said. "They are calling it a miscalculation." "Generous," Marcus said. "They are also asking to speak to you specifically." He looked at her. The 2 in custody told them. She held her cup in all 4 hands. They described what happened. The strike team was 14 trained Keth combat personnel. "You are..." She stopped, searched for something. "You are one human from the table at the back of the room." He drank his coffee. "Cousin. They want to understand," she said. "The command. They want to know what they didn't account for." "Are you asking me to talk to them?" "The High Council is asking," she said. "I am also asking, but for different reasons." "What are your reasons?" he said. She was quiet for a moment, doing the Vethani face sequence thing. He had gotten better at reading it. What was moving across her face now was not complicated. It was one thing, repeated, which was the expression she had when she was saying something she had decided to say rather than something that had simply arrived. "I have been observing you since you arrived," she said. "It was my assignment, but now," she paused, "my observation is not professional anymore. I would like you to know that." He looked at her. At her 4 arms and her too expressive face and the data pad she wasn't using, and the way she had found him in every room since the first morning when she had stood beside him in the exhibition hall and said, flatly, "You have been walking these corridors since before sunrise." He said, "I know." A pause then, and I'll talk to the Keth command, he said. And after that, I have some thoughts about what I'd like to do next. She looked at him. You are planning to stay. It was not a question, because she was good at the specific kind of attention that reads what isn't being said, and what was not being said by Marcus Holt, sitting in an observation lounge above a gas giant 40 light years from his broken water heater, drinking something that was almost coffee in a galaxy that had just found out he existed, was quite a lot. "I think the consortium needs someone who checks walls," he said. The communication with the Keth command lasted 40 minutes. Marcus said almost nothing for the first 30, which was intentional. He listened to the Keth commander, a voice that the translation chip rendered as deep and measured, a voice that had clearly given a lot of orders and received a lot of results, walk through what had been planned and why, and he let the commander talk, because you learn more from listening than from questioning. The Keth command had made a specific set of assumptions about the consortium that had been, until 48 hours ago, entirely accurate. The consortium was capable and organized and politically sophisticated. It was not a military force. It had never fought anything, not in 400 years of collective existence. Its security was built around deterrence through treaty and wealth and political consequence, not through the capacity to actually stop something that had decided to move. That assessment was correct. The one variable that had not been in the Keth's calculation, the one variable that had not been in anyone's calculation, was Marcus. "You were not supposed to be there," the Keth commander said, not accusing, statting. "I know," Marcus said. "The Deathworld species," the commander said. "We have your planet on our records. We considered contact 17 years ago. Our assessment was that the risk of escalation was too high." A pause. "You are a violent species." "Yes," Marcus said. "Unpredictable." "Sometimes," Marcus said. "We're also persistent, adaptable. We have very short memory when it comes to things that have hurt us, and very long memory when it comes to things that have threatened the people we're responsible for." He looked at the communication panel. "I think you should know that going forward." A long pause from the other end. "Going forward," the Keth commander said. "You anticipate there will be a going forward." "I anticipate you're smart enough to know that what failed here would fail again," Marcus said, "and smart enough to ask what a different path looks like." He sat forward. "The consortium has been trying to talk to you for 6 years. I've been here 3 days and I'm telling you they're serious about it. They're not strong the way you're strong, but they're organized and they're patient and they have 43 species and they know every trade route in this sector." He paused. "You should talk to them. Actually talk." Silence. "And if we do not, then you'll have this conversation again," Marcus said. "Except next time the consortium will know what to look for in the walls, and I'll be better rested." The silence stretched long enough that he thought the channel had dropped. Then the Keth commander said, "You are very confident for someone who was not supposed to be in that room." "That's generally how it goes," Marcus said. He called home that evening. His sister picked up on the third ring, which was normal, and said, "Marcus, why is your face all over the news?" in the tone she used for situations that were his fault, which they usually were. "It's a long story," he said. "The water heater guy called," she said. "He needs to schedule." "Tell him I'll be delayed." "How delayed?" He looked out the observation lounge window. The gas giant below had shifted, slow and enormous, its storm still turning. The pale green planet of a world that had never heard of him, in a system he'd learned the name of 3 days ago, lit softly in the light of a star that was not his sun. "Tell him a few months," Marcus said, "maybe longer." His sister was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're going to be out there for a while." Yeah, he said, I think so. Are you okay? He thought about the shoulder and the arm and the ribs, which were all being managed, and the 6 hours of sleep, and the coffee cousin, and Zara's face doing the thing it had done when he said I know, and the gas giant turning below him in its patient, enormous way. Yeah, he said, I'm good. The consortium's revised charter, the one that established the Office of Integrated Security, the first formal defense planning body in 400 years of collective history, was drafted over the following 2 weeks while Marcus was still on the station. He was consulted on the parts that related to threat assessment and physical security protocol. He submitted a written report on the wall-checking methodology, which was officially titled Biological Threat Detection, Non-Sensor Approaches, and which he privately thought was the strangest document he had ever written, stranger even than the time he had written a military after-action report about a situation he was not cleared to describe, which meant the report was mostly redactions. Oswell was not removed from his post. He was given additional resources, a larger team, and the kind of institutional support that told Marcus the consortium had decided that blaming the security commander who had never seen this before would be less useful than keeping him and improving what surrounded him. Marcus thought that was the right call. Vex, who Marcus had filed on day one as the most arrogant representative in the room, submitted a formal proposal to the High Council recommending expanded contact with Earth and the opening of preliminary membership discussions. The proposal included a passage that the translation chip rendered, in clean, careful language, as an acknowledgement that the consortium's decision to classify Sol 3 as a hazard designation and restrict contact had been, in Vex's exact phrasing, a failure of imagination dressed as caution. Marcus read it twice. He decided he had underestimated Vex. He did not tell Vex this. He thought Vex probably knew. On the last night before his scheduled departure, which was not actually a departure, because he had accepted a temporary advisory role that would keep him on the station until the Office of Integrated Security had its basic framework established, and the temporary had already developed the specific quality of things that were not going to stay temporary. Marcus sat in the observation lounge and looked at the gas giant. Zara was beside him. She had been beside him for most of the last week, which was not a coincidence, and they had both stopped pretending it was. When the letter came, she said, the one inviting a human they debated for 2 weeks, some of the council thought it was too strange, a Class 9 species in a diplomatic setting. Others thought it was interesting. A few thought it was funny. She paused. It passed by a margin of 7 votes. 7, he said. 7, she said. If 4 more council members had voted against it, you would not have received the invitation. He thought about that, about the water heater bill, the purple paper, the Tuesday. If 4 more voted against it, he said, you'd still have 16 Keth in your walls right now. Yes, she said. I have thought about that many times this week. He looked at the planet below, at the storm which was still turning, which would probably still be turning when they were both gone from this particular conversation. It did not know about the Keth or the consortium or the 7 votes. It did not know about any of it. It just kept turning, the way large things do. What changes now? Zara asked. He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about things when they actually mattered, and he wasn't going to do himself the disservice of a quick answer. Everything, he said, slowly. The consortium will build what it should have built already. The Keth will recalculate. Other species who have been watching from the edges will recalculate. Earth, he stopped. Earth is going to find out the rest of the galaxy exists and has known about us for a long time. That's a conversation we're going to need to have at home, and it's going to be complicated. Are you prepared for complicated? Zara asked. He almost smiled. I grew up on a Class 9 Deathworld, he said. Complicated is my normal. She looked at him. The expression on her face was the single, steady one, the one that wasn't cycling, wasn't performing, wasn't moving through sequences of cautious Vethani emotional display. It was just there, uncomplicated and clear. He knew what it meant. He had known for a few days. The gas giant turned below them, enormous and patient, and the station's night cycle settled into its deep lavender quiet, and somewhere down the corridor, the Office of Integrated Security was beginning its first working meeting, and two Keth sat in a secure bay that was not going to hold them forever, and 43 species were in the middle of understanding something important about the world they lived in. Marcus sat with his almost coffee and his wrapped arm and his slowly improving shoulder and looked out at the stars, which were not his stars, above a planet that was not his planet, in a galaxy that had not known his name 3 weeks ago. He thought the joke was the invitation. He thought nothing about this is funny anymore. He thought good. He was exactly where he was supposed to be.